We spend so much time on the how, which is how do we meet clients? How do we translate into our clients' languages? How do we prepare the forms that are needed for court? How do we convey the information that people need to avoid legal problems upstream? We are obsessed with these how questions when we should really be focused on the what and the why questions. What's happening to our clients? Why are people being evicted? Why are people being deported? Why are people being found ineligible for benefits? Let's tackle those. Those are the hard questions. And instead of being able to do that, we're obsessed or stuck focusing on the dumb questions because we don't have a better way to think about them. And that's where AI can really plug in.
Today on LawNext, from legal aid attorney to legal tech innovator, today's guest, Sateesh Nori, brings a unique perspective to the intersection of artificial intelligence and access to justice. After spending 2 decades in the trenches as a housing lawyer in New York City, Nori now bridges multiple worlds, continuing his legal aid practice while teaching at NYU Law School and working as a senior legal innovation strategist at Just Tech. He recently helped launch an AI-powered tool to help tenants understand their repair rights, and he believes artificial intelligence could be the key to finally making meaningful progress and closing the justice gap. Today, in a conversation recorded live at the Legal Services Corporation's Innovations in Technology conference in Phoenix last week, we discuss why Nori believes that AI is as transformative as electricity, how he's using it in his own work, and why he believes law schools are failing to prepare students for the AI revolution. This is Bob Ambrogi, and you are listening to LawNext, the podcast that features the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law. Before we get to my conversation with Sateesh, please take a moment to hear from the sponsors who so generously support this podcast. You didn't go to law school to waste time writing and responding to discovery requests. Never waste time on discovery again with BriefPoint. BriefPoint drafts your discovery responses and requests for documents within minutes of your first sign-in. BriefPoint is the most reliable discovery drafting solution on the market, and it works right out of the box. Get your first document drafted by going to briefpoint.ai and clicking Get Started. No credit card required. BriefPoint. Draft what matters, automate the rest. You deserve a technology partner that understands the unique challenges of modern law practices. Paradigm isn't just software, it's your strategic advantage. Combining the power of top-tier legal practice management platforms, including Practice Panther, Meriscase, Law, and Bill for Time, Paradigm provides a complete suite of tools designed to meet the unique needs of law firms of all sizes and specialties. Streamline operations, enhance client communication, and reclaim your time. Discover how at joinparadigm.com. Now let's get to today's conversation. All right, we are cooking. Sateesh Nori, welcome to LawNext.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with you. We are here on premises at the Legal Services Corporation's Innovations in Technology conference, and obviously the topic du jour is technology and access to justice. I've learned a lot about you in the last day, because knowing I was going to interview you, and I was trying to find out as much as I could. And you've had a really interesting journey. I mean, you've in particular, you've spent 2 decades plus as a practicing legal services lawyer focusing on housing issues, and then more recently transitioned into working more on the technology side. So I wonder if you could kind of tell me a little bit about that journey, about the practice that you had as a legal services lawyer, and what caused you to want to make that transition into working on tech.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not obvious to me or anyone that I would end up where I am today based on where I've been. I went to law school because I wanted to be a trial lawyer. I wanted to go to court. I wanted to represent people. I thought it would be really fun. I was on the debate team in junior high school and high school, and I really enjoyed arguing and coming up with reasons and counter arguments. And so I always thought I'd go to law school. I had no doubt in my mind that I would be a lawyer. And in law school, I was exposed to human rights and human rights law. And I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to advocate for people who are being deprived of their basic human rights. And internationally, there are major issues about access to food and access to clean water and access to education. And so I did a lot of work on human rights in law school, and I graduated. And then I thought, well, I want to be a school teacher. This is what I want to do. I've always enjoyed working with kids, and I appreciated, their innocence and their curiosity. And I feel like I'm a big kid at heart, tell a lot of bad jokes. And so I took the exam to become a teaching fellow in New York City, which is kind of like Teach for America, but local to New York City. But then there came a time when I had to either sit for the bar exam or delay that into the future at some point. And I thought, I'll never have a better chance at passing the bar exam than right after law school. So I'd better focus on this. And my parents felt the same way about it. And so I took the bar exam and I passed. And I thought, okay, I've got to pursue this career as an attorney. And I looked for human rights related work. And they're really hard to find. Those jobs are not easy to come by. There are very few people who do that work, and most of them are on the ground in war zones. And that wasn't for me. I wanted to live in New York City, where I'm from, basically. And so I applied for jobs as far and wide as I could in areas that I thought are adjacent to human rights work. And legal aid in New York City was hiring for housing attorneys, tenant defense attorneys. It's a topic I knew nothing about. And so I took the job. I got the job. I was lucky. And I started working with low-income tenants in Brooklyn who were being displaced by gentrification and rising rents. And Brooklyn was becoming cool. And, I happen to live in Brooklyn, so I'm part of the problem. And over time, I realized, this is really hard work, but not for the reasons that people think. There are the obvious reasons, like the laws are harsh. The system favors landlords over tenants. We don't have enough affordable housing, so people are struggling and competing for the very few apartments that there are. But that there were so many practical issues of working in legal aid, which is we don't have enough resources. We can never work hard enough to meet the need. Our systems are broken. Our technology is out of date. And so I got really frustrated, and that led me on a path toward technology.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never practiced housing law per se, but one of the reasons I went to law school was because I had been a community organizer before law school and did a lot of landlord-tenant work, obviously on behalf of tenants, a low-income neighborhood, and had a very sort of liberal housing court judge for those days, who would allow me as a advocate, to come in to court with tenants and speak on their behalf to some extent. So I had some exposure, and that's kind of what set me off on the path of going to law school in the first place, that and a million other reasons. But one of the fascinating things about reading about you is it's kind of a rabbit hole. You've done a lot of stuff. And one of the things you did is you've just written a memoir, or published a memoir last year about your years as a housing court, and as a landlord-tenant advocate. And I was wondering if there are lessons, first of all, why you wanted to write a book about it, but second of all, if there are lessons out of that book, the stories you tell in that book that inform what you're doing now as a technologist in legal services.
Yeah, absolutely. And then thanks for bringing up the book. It's called Sheltered, 20 Years in Housing Court. I wrote it during the pandemic. I was lost during the pandemic. I'm sure many of us were. And I was thinking about what I was doing with my life and what did it all mean. And watching people who are innocent to die suddenly of this unexpected illness really shook me. And also I wasn't commuting because I was working remotely. And so I had, several hours each day to put my thoughts on paper. And it just started with one anecdote about a client who taught me something about myself. And then I realized all my clients have taught me something about myself or about the world or about the city that we live in. And I started writing chapter after chapter, and I realized that there was a thread that went through. One of them is me And my feelings of being an outsider, being an immigrant, someone who is a naturalized citizen who was born in another country, who came here.
You're from India, right?
I'm from India, yeah. And the idea that I would have had this different life if my parents hadn't made that decision to come here to start a whole new life from scratch, and wondering what my life would be like, and then to really drill down on what my values are, what do I really care about. And I realized I really care about solving problems and working with people who have problems that can be solved and should be solved. And learning that, I'm just a kind of passenger in this, and my clients are the real heroes. And they're the ones who go through so much, things that I could never endure, things that I'm lucky, I'm privileged to have, never faced eviction, never faced displacement or any serious housing conditions. So put it all down just for myself, really. Like, maybe my kids will read it, and they haven't still, but they're only 12. And it turned out to be an interesting entry point into this world too, of like housing court. How does it work? And really highlights the rich-poor gap in New York. Many people in New York City have never even heard of housing court. They've never set foot in it. They've never been sued there. And yet, for millions of low-income people, they're there over and over and over again. It's part of their lives. And I thought that was really unfair. So I put it all in writing, and it's out there now, and I'm really proud of it.
Yeah. So when you left the practice and kind of transitioned, I know that you had started, I think, a nonprofit called Just Fix. Is that right?
Yeah.
Tell me about that. What was that? And is that still a thing? Or
Yeah, Just Fix is still a thing. And I was a board member. I didn't start it, but it kind of was my journey to Just Fix was born out of my desire to do better, to use technology or whatever tools we have to make legal services work better, to make the systems work better for low-income people, to really fulfill the promise of equal justice under the law. And Just Fix had a really interesting tool, which it still exists. It's called Who Owns What? And it allows tenants to search their landlord and see what they're really about. How many other buildings do they own? What are their business practices? Do they evict a lot of people? Do they maintain their buildings properly? And this is the type of information that was secret. Landlords hid behind LLCs and corporations and partnerships. And so it really broke the door open for tenant power and tenant organizing. And so I did that for a little while, and I realized that there's a lot more coming. The AI revolution was just right around the corner. And so I thought when I saw a demo of an AI tool probably 2 years ago at this point, and it was a RAG bot. It was retrieval augmented generation, take a knowledge base and interact with it and get answers and insights from it. I thought, this is it. I was convinced on the spot, like a conversion, like a lightning bolt hit me. And I thought, this is it. This is going to change the world. This is certainly going to change legal practice. Everything that we've been struggling with as lawyers and paralegals and social justice warriors is obsolete now. This is the way to get this type legal information and justice to people. And that was it. And here we are 2 years later, and I've been able to really immerse myself in this field and been welcomed by technologists and lawyers and academics. And I think
so. Describe what you do now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of have my, if I had 3 feet, I would have one in 3 different worlds. One is I continue to be a legal aid lawyer. So I represent tenants, every day in
you still
court.
do? I did not know
still
that.
do that part-time at the Legal Aid Society in New York City. And the second thing I do is I teach a law clinic at NYU Law School, and it's a tenant defense clinic. So those things are kind of hand in glove. And I teach future housing lawyers how to do the work. And we represent real clients, and we go to court, and we talk about legal issues and ethical issues and policy issues around housing and supply, rent regulation, and things like that. And the third thing that, as of 3 months ago, that I started to do is I joined a justice technology company called Just Tech. And what Just Tech does is they bridge the gap for legal nonprofits who need to build or utilize technology in order to do their work better. And this is a niche that not a lot of people fill. There are big tech companies that work with corporate law firms and corporations, but very few that work with nonprofits. And so my role there, the job is called Senior Legal Innovation Strategist, which is a title that ChatGPT helped me come up with. And my role there is to kind of plug in AI and talk about AI, build adoption for AI in legal services organizations like the one that I work at, and allow people to really think about the access to justice gap in a new way. And to think of it not as, we'll just hire more people. We need more money to hire more people, but to rethink the way that we do these things, the way that we do legal research, the way that we intake clients, the way that we prepare documents, and really help people in a different way to scale up to the promise of what we all kind of joined and signed up for, is to help as many people as possible.
Yeah. Sorry, I misspoke earlier about your leaving. For some reason, I had thought you had left the practice of law and were focusing more on just the tech side. And I knew you had the clinical work at NYU. That's really interesting that you're bridging those kind of three areas in your daily life, really. And I mean, obviously, it must be a little bit of a split personality syndrome going from working in a legal services office, which I imagine there's probably a lot of interest in technology, but probably not a lot of proficiency or use of it still.
That's true.
And then to a clinical setting where, I don't know, you can tell me how much you're incorporating that into the kind of the clinical work you're doing, and then into the development and thinking and strategizing setting. So what's it like for you to kind of live in those three worlds?
It's a lot of email accounts and a lot of platforms. But what's really striking to me is how differently each of these worlds approach technology. Law schools, for example, are way behind in seeing what's going to happen to the legal industry. And they're still teaching as if the billable hour is going to be a thing. And if you think about the way chatbots work and legal research is going to work, what used to take 20 hours now takes 45 seconds. So what are law schools training their future lawyers to do? And the other thing that struck me, I recently attended a legal conference, is that law professors are still not able to teach the human skills that lawyers are going to need, because AI is going to do the robotic, repetitive tasks like legal research and discovery and document review that legal associates have been trained to do and are being trained to do. But no one in law school is teaching the human skills, the client interviewing, the interaction, the negotiation. Those are the things that lawyers of the future are really going to need to learn. And I'm really afraid that anyone who's in law school now is in a time capsule, like they're on a spaceship to the moon, and they're going to get off on the other side and be in a different world, a different planet from where they started, and they're totally unprepared.
Yeah.
So I fear for law students right now.
Yeah.
And my message to anyone in law school right now is like, learn this stuff on your own if your law school isn't teaching it, because you're going to need to know how it works.
Yeah. It's interesting what you're saying about law schools and what they're teaching, because the flip side of that is I don't know that they're doing a very good job teaching the technology side of this either, right? I mean, you say they're not teaching the human skills that are going to be needed because technology is going to be able to do a lot of this. But my experience, and I go to a lot of conferences and I talk to a lot of law professors, is that they're kind of afraid of this technology themselves.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, they're not teaching the technology side either. There are many people who probably chose the law as a career path because they're anti-technology. They want to do the kind of human side of the legal world. And legal technology is difficult to really understand, like what's its place in the larger technology landscape? What's the market for legal technology? How do you access legal technology? And so for many in law school, the clinical professors have an advantage. They're using technology and teaching it more than the doctrinal professors, who are probably relying on the same contracts outlined that they used in 1985 for the most part. And there's no option to plug in any kind of technology to their teaching methods, so they don't. And there's nothing in a law school setting that is requiring them to do that. So the pace of change in law schools has always been slow, and it's particularly painfully slow now because technology is moving so quickly in the legal space.
Sateesh Nori says he's represented roughly 1,000 people in his career, but he's had to turn away probably 10,000. He believes this problem of intake, of having to turn away 9 out of 10 people who seek help, is one of legal aid's biggest challenges, and he believes it is a challenge that AI could help solve. When we come back, we'll hear his thoughts on that. But first, please take this opportunity to learn about the sponsors who so generously support this podcast. Paradigm is transforming legal technology by uniting the most powerful practice management solutions in the industry. Practice Panther, Maris Case, Lolly Law, and Bill for Time come together to provide law firms with an unparalleled toolkit for success. From comprehensive practice management to native online payments and intelligent time tracking, Paradigm delivers a complete suite of technologies that adapt to the unique challenges of legal professionals. Elevate your practice with the ultimate technological partner. Discover the Paradigm Advantage at joinparadigm.com. Welcome back to my conversation with Sateesh Nori about using artificial intelligence to expand access to justice, which we recorded live at the Legal Services Corporation's Innovations in Technology conference in Phoenix last week. Nori equates AI to the invention of electricity, and he believes it will have a profound impact on improving access to justice. As we return to our conversation, we'll hear more about his vision for AI and the future of legal services. Let's get back to that.
Yesterday, ahead of this conference was something called the AI Summit for the Summit on AI for Legal Aid or something like that. I forget what it was called yesterday, but Kristen Sunday at Paladin and Legal Services Corporation put it on. You were among those who spoke yesterday. And during a panel that you were speaking on, you talked about AI. You said, this is like the invention of fire. I don't know if you remember saying that, but if you could expand on that. I mean, what really do you see as the potential here? How significant could this be in addressing the justice gap?
Yeah, I think I might revise that and say, let's say perhaps the internet was the invention of fire and AI is like the invention of electricity, right? And it's going to flow through everything and power everything that we interact with, from self-driving cars, which I took yesterday here in Phoenix.
Up and away, Mo.
Yeah, to the way that our phones work, our computers, our interactions with other people. And in the access to justice space, I think one of the things that strikes me is we spend so much time on the how, which is how do we meet clients? How do we translate into our clients' languages? How do we prepare the forms that are needed for court? How do we convey the information that people need to avoid legal problems upstream? We are obsessed with these how questions when we should really be focused on the what and the why questions. What's happening to our clients? Why are people being evicted? Why are people being deported? Why are people being found ineligible for benefits? Let's tackle those. Those are the hard questions. And instead of being able to do that, we're obsessed or stuck focusing on the dumb questions because we don't have a better way to think about them. And that's where AI can really plug in, which is that it's really good at the clerical work of being a lawyer. It's really good at translation, document preparation, legal research, organizing information and data. And it leaves us the time and energy to do the hard things, like go to court and conduct a trial, negotiate on behalf of our client, counsel them when they're in a crisis that has a legal implication to it. That's why we're all here. That's why I went to law school. I sometimes say I didn't go to law school to work with other lawyers. I don't like lawyers, but I went to law school to try to help people with problems, with real problems. And I'm not able to do that because so much of my time is wasted on this like mundane stuff, this everyday stuff, because we don't have a better way. Now we have a better way.
Yeah. Are you using AI in your own practice directly?
Yeah, I do.
How are you using it?
For example, a lot of what tenant defense law is about is applying for rental assistance from agencies, from state and local agencies, so that our clients can pay what's owed and not get evicted. And why do they owe rent? Because it's really hard when you're paying more than 30% of your monthly income towards your rent. Anything that happens to you, illness, job loss, new family member, death in the family, means you're on the rocks. And so a lot of what we do over and over again is fill out forms and write letters for rental assistance. And I use AI to write those letters. I don't include my clients' names or any confidential information, but I might say in a prompt, write me a letter on behalf of an elderly tenant who's facing eviction for owing $12,000, but who has lived in her apartment for 50 years, and if evicted, will become homeless. And in a fraction of a second, I will get a letter that I can spend maybe 5 more minutes on, and it'll be ready to send to the agency. And this is a task that might have taken me 2 to 3 hours previously. And the way to think about it is, well, that's not that much time savings, perhaps you might say. But you multiply that times the number of times you do that task, and the number of people in your organization who are doing that task, and the number of organizations that are doing those tasks across a city or a state or a country. And you're really talking about using resources better. Every dollar we save is a dollar we can spend towards another client representation. And so that's a simple example of using AI. I also use AI to synthesize information, come up with arguments, or write a starter legal memo or correspondence. It's the easiest thing to do is to outsource your correspondence to AI. All the emails, letters of recommendation for students, for example. Don't tell my students, but I'm sure a lot of professors are outsourcing that to AI. And you just have to work on the margins to personalize or customize the work product, or you can just improve your prompting to get a better result. But it's all about time. That time that's saved means you can use it for more important functions.
As we're sitting here speaking, you've just helped launch something called Roxanne, which is an AI-powered tool created with an organization called Housing Court Answers, and also using the technology company Joseph to basically answer tenants' questions about repair rights under New York City law. I wonder, first of all, if you could kind of tell us a little bit more about that. But I'm also curious about your thoughts on the use of AI to directly help consumers without a lawyer interface involved, and where you see us going on that.
Yeah, I mean, the first part is really interesting. Even though New York City has one of the biggest core of lawyers for free anywhere, we have a right to counsel for tenants, which the annual cost is $400 or $500 million. Tenants can't get information about repairs. The only way you can get a free lawyer in New York City is if you're facing eviction. So what about the family that doesn't have heat in the winter, or the child who may be suffering from lead poisoning because the paint's chipping on their walls, or the elderly person who's way too hot in their apartment in the middle of summer and they have no recourse? How do they get this information? Well, right now, or before this tool was launched, they would have to call a hotline. And sometimes people call hotlines and they wait for hours. Sometimes they speak to someone who doesn't know the answer, and they're told to call a different hotline or call back on a different day. Or they can go and travel to a legal office and wait for hours and hours and be told that, well, unless you're facing eviction, we're not going to help you. It's kind of like an emergency room in a hospital, where people who don't have really serious injuries are turned away or told to self-treat or self-medicate. But that's really bad because housing conditions have significant impacts on the health and quality of life of people. So the reason that AI works so well is it allows people to get this information, what I call actionable legal information. And that's really significant because we have these laws called unauthorized practice of law, and only lawyers can give legal advice. And it's a stupid rule, I think, because there are not enough lawyers to provide meaningful legal advice. And as you know, there's this report from LSC from 2022 that says 92% of the civil legal problems in America are going unaddressed. So we're never going to lawyer our way out of the problem. We're never going to fund our way out of the problem with more lawyers. So let's give people the information they need to act on their problems. And sometimes they don't even know their legal problems. They just know they have a problem. They don't know to access a lawyer or try to find legal help. So let's give them that help where they are, meet them where they are, and allow them to have empowerment and take ownership and solve these problems. So we started with the problem of repairs because it's relatively low risk. If the AI makes a mistake, the tenant's going to be in the same place they started with the bad condition. They're not going to be evicted or homeless or lose a benefit that they rely upon. And that's the framework that we started with. And fortunately, Joseph, which is a tech company based in Australia, offered their services for free. They gave us the tech, partially because they wanted us to prove, for them and for other clients that the tech works. And it does. It works really well.
Yeah.
And Housing Court Answers is a nonprofit, a tiny nonprofit of a dozen people. And they try to field 200 phone calls a day from tenants. And it's nearly impossible to deliver quality information at that volume with a tiny budget. So it was a perfect fit for an AI bot that could answer a lot of the easy questions for people, like where's housing court? How do I file a court case to get my heat back on? What happens if I have mold? And leave the hard stuff for the experienced operators and experts to handle.
Right. So they can deal with those more routine kinds of questions, free up people to ask more complicated questions. How do you get people to use it? I mean, is there a marketing campaign around it, or how are we going to make people aware of this?
Yeah, to get people to buy in. There's a lot of fear about what AI is. It's a black box. People don't understand how it works. And all they read in the papers is it's hallucinating and it's misleading people and it's screwing up and your lawyers are making up cases in court because of AI. So that is another challenge. And I'm not a marketing expert, but I just think that if enough people use it and they see that it works and we promote it and, organizations like courts and larger nonprofits start to adopt it, then we'll see those positive effects and we'll see that kind of freeing up of resources that we're hoping for. But right now, it's just going to be word of mouth. We don't have a budget to advertise this stuff. Hopefully, this podcast will help.
I don't know that I reach that many low-income tenants in New York City with my podcast, but hopefully it can help. But you said that this was kind of a relatively low-risk starting point. Does that suggest that you want to take this further and do more with it? And what does that look like?
Absolutely. I think there's no reason why a chatbot that's built upon a knowledge base that's curated by experts can't give advice about evictions, about rent assistance, about immigration issues, about navigating Social Security for disability benefits. All of these are rules-based structures and systems that AI is really good at navigating. And we just have to build the guardrails and, verify the accuracy of the tools. And potentially we can help 10 times, 100 times the people get the assistance that they're lacking right now and they'll never get if we keep going on the same path forward. So yeah, absolutely. I think we can kind of expand the scope and scale and breadth and depth of these tools.
You mentioned the unauthorized practice of law issue. I agree with you that that's more an obstacle than anything else to expanding access to justice. But I'm curious whether you have any ethical concerns about this technology, either using it in your own practice or using it direct to consumer without kind of a lawyer involved. I mean, are there any concerns about the sort of automated decision-making, in a sense, as it's being applied to low-income, whether tenants or other consumers in other positions?
Absolutely. There's two big concerns. One is privacy and security. There is a huge risk that people's confidential information, their social security numbers, their personal details of their cases will be out there and will be used by a model and be spit out in some other context. And we have to really protect against that from happening. And that's a huge risk. There are a lot of unknowns and unknown unknowns on that front. And much of this conference that we're at is about that. It's like, how do we deal with that question? And then the second risk is accuracy. Like, people are extremely concerned that these tools are going to make mistakes. And I think part of that is because lawyers are risk averse, and that's always the way they're going to think. And they're going to compare the tool to a 100% perfect outcome, when in fact, the comparison should be to zero, right? In the status quo, people are getting no help, and these tools sometimes are 90% accurate or better. Let's adopt them, and let's test them, and let's iterate on them and make them better. But I think that still is a concern. And it's still a risk that the tools are going to get things wrong, that they're going to be a lot of like fly-by-night outfits that are going to put out stuff directly to the public. If you go to ChatGPT's store, literally anybody can put out a tool and give legal help. Anybody. And you have no idea who's going to trust that, how they verify their information, and so on. The same is true on Reddit. Like, a lot of people get legal information on Reddit, and that's really scary. So if we don't enter this space as lawyers and educators in this space and legal services providers, we're going to cede the ground to all these bad actors.
Yeah.
And we're going to have a lot worse outcomes.
Yeah. I'm curious, one of the, another question that came up yesterday during the AI summit was that of AI's potential to make the justice gap even wider, because big firms, big companies will be able to afford sophisticated AI tools like co-counsel from Thomson Reuters that was all over the conference yesterday, which is not a cheap tool to have. Whereas legal services organizations or nonprofits that are trying to help work in the community are not going to have access to all of those same tools. Is that a concern for you? And what's your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's this thing I heard once, which is that the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed.
Right.
And it's our job to make sure that our people, legal services folks and our clients, have access to these tools. And fortunately, they're very cheap. There have never been tech tools that are cheaper than these tools that we're looking at right now. Now, there are obviously other costs to the tools, environmental costs and resource drains on the power that's required to power AI. But in terms of like dollar for dollar, these are extremely cheap, if not free right now, for us to test and to use. And so I think it's kind of a cop-out to say, there'll be two tiers. Another way to look at it is that these types of tools are potentially going to destroy the corporate legal market, but save legal services. So destroying the billable hour, as I described earlier, destroying the associate partner model of working on legal questions and legal cases. The same reasons that those models are going to be destroyed are the things that are going to save legal services, like quick research, quick document production, agentic AI that can do all the tasks that law firms hire hundreds and hundreds of people to do. So there could be a flip to it, which is that for the first time, we're going to be stronger or equal to our adversaries on the corporate side, or the government side, big landlords, ICE and the Department of Justice, for example, or the DA's office. And we're finally going to be able to catch up with them using some of these tools.
Yeah, it is interesting that AI could have that potential. I mean, actually, after this conference of last year, I wrote a piece on my blog about the gap, not in the access to justice gap, but the gap in legal technology, because so much of the funding goes to developing technology that serves big law firms and big corporations. The entire TIG grant budget is like $5 million a year, which is, a drop in the bucket in that other world. And last year, this conference was juxtaposed against the Legal Week conference in New York, which is, huge exhibit booths and everybody's spending tons of money on fancy parties and everything else. And then you come here and it's modest little booths and 10 exhibitors and everybody's trying to get by. But it does really seem that AI has the potential to, and I've been writing about legal tech for a long time, and there's always been this idea of leveling the playing field. And it just hasn't fully played out up until now. But I think AI really does have that potential.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you because it's easy to use. That's another factor we really haven't talked about that much, which is that it doesn't require coding. It doesn't require the technical expertise of like hiring third-party companies and consultants. Anybody can just open their laptop.
Even a lawyer.
Even a lawyer, a Luddite, can open this stuff up and work with it And I've seen so many aha moments at this conference over the past couple of days. It's been really amazing. Just people saying like, my mind was blown, or their jaws dropping, or saying, I could do that. I could do that right now and change the way that we work and help more people. So it's really interesting to see that leveling effect take place in real time and then kind of predict how it's going to spread. Like, because of conferences like this and your podcast, having this stuff spread and people understanding that we can use this stuff and it's easy.
Yeah. What else are you working on right now with your tech hat on, or do you want to be working on? What's next for you?
Yeah, I really want to tackle the problem of intake. I think intake in legal services is the biggest unresolved issue. How do we deal with the volume of people who seek our help? And personally, I think it's immoral. I said at this conference that I probably represented 1,000 people in my life, but I've turned away probably 10,000. And that's really hard to deal with and to accept that that's the reality of this nature of work, is that you're turning away 9 out of 10 people who seek your help. And you start to question, well, who am I to turn these people away? Like, why am I the person who can decide who gets to stay in their home and who gets evicted based on some intake model that we have? So I'm really keen on like resolving that problem of triage and intake and allowing the lawyers to be lawyers and the professionals to do their jobs on the hard questions and think of the results that we might be able to accomplish if we're actually litigating the hard questions in our world, not just dealing with the easy ones because that's the way our systems are built.
Yeah. There was a horrible study in Boston in Massachusetts, where I am, a few years ago, of that very problem of having to turn people away. And it was, women in immediate abuse situations, many of whom never even seek legal help, but of those who did seek legal help, something like 50% of them were being turned away because there just weren't enough resources to help them. And that's a situation where it's not every legal problem involves the threat of immediate bodily harm, but that does. So how do you do that? How do you tackle that problem?
Well, one of the things that AI can do is help people upstream from a legal problem. So the reason so many people show up at legal services is they've had no help all along their journey up to the point where they're in court. They didn't know that they could apply for rental assistance immediately when they fell behind in their rent, or they had the right to a lease in their name immediately when their lease expired because they're protected by rent control, or they could add a family member, or a family member could take over an apartment, or their immigration status could have been resolved prior to that removal proceeding being commenced. And so AI can, in very unique ways, deliver this type of information in different languages, in different modalities, like audio, phone calls, text messages, videos, and really stop a large number of people from ever ending up at the door of a legal services office. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
And then with those who do end up at the door, answering the easy questions like we discussed already, and leaving the hard ones to the professionals. I think that's really easy to envision happening. And it doesn't happen now because there's no way to deliver that type of information to people in a way they can access it.
I'm curious, you've been fighting this fight for more than 2 decades as a lawyer in the trenches. You're now seeing the promise of this technology. Are we going to get to a point where we really are able to meaningfully chip away at the justice gap, do you think?
Absolutely. The first step is to bring that 92% number down, and it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
And
it's
so
only
we've run
gone
out
up
of
over
It's
the
only
last
gone
20
up.
years.
Yeah. And we've tried all our best ideas. And so I think we will see that go down. But one of the obstacles is unauthorized practice of law. Another one is the reluctance of law schools to train on these types of tools and methods. And a third one is just the reluctance of people in legal services in our world to really trust these tools. We have to overcome those things, and they're going to happen, I think. There's no doubt that these barriers are going to fall. And when they do, we're going to start to see progress on this. And perhaps we'll attract even more people into this field, because that's another problem altogether, that the way that we work now is not sustainable for the human beings who work in this space. It causes burnout and fatigue. People are demoralized. They don't feel like they're solving anybody's problems. They're part of a system that just is like a giant machine that's spitting out bad outcomes for people. So I think that could also be a positive. It's like, hey, the work that you thought you were going to do when you decided to go to law school, that's actually the work you're going to be doing. It's not a bait and switch like a lot of people feel about law school.
I didn't even mention you also have a TED Talk. So you are a busy man. Any last thoughts? Any final words before we wrap up here?
No, I mean, I'm really I feel really lucky to be in this position right now. And I feel like I've got a front row seat and I'm watching something huge. Like it's a defining moment of our civilization. And I don't think that's an overstatement. So I'm along for the ride. I can't wait to see what happens next.
Yeah, it's well, I'm glad to see you're on the ride, and I'm glad to see you're part of this. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today at this conference. I know everybody's busy here, and time is rare. You've already spoken a couple of times in just the last 2 days. I don't know if you've got more on the agenda, but
my pleasure. My pleasure.
Well, great. Thanks, Sateesh.
Thanks to Sateesh Nori for sitting down with me during the LSC ITC conference. And thanks to you for listening to today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to share your own thoughts or comments, please do so by messaging us on LinkedIn or other social media, or just email me directly, ambrogi@gmail.com. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor of this podcast, we can help you with that too. Send an email to ben@lawnextmedia.com. And last but not least, if you're a fan of LawNext, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. LawNext is a production of LawNext Media. I'm your host, Bob Ambrogi. I hope you'll join us again next time for another episode of LawNext.